One of the best predictors of the probability of economic development in developing countries is the attitude in those countries towards equal rights for women. And it looks causal. The more positively the country is predisposed to female rights, the more likely they are to develop economically. And maybe that's because that indicates that they're open to new ideas or something like that, or open to transformation. So that's one kind of equality. Open up the playing field so that everybody has a chance to compete and cooperate and land where they will. But then the other kind of equality is equality of outcome. And that's often described as equity in today's language. And so the ultimate equity utopia would be take every job, every conceivable kind of job, and then stratify that by every conceivable level of authority within every job. And then ensure that every single category of person is represented in precise proportion to their prevalence in the population. So every job should be 50% women and 50% men, and say 13% non-Western ethnic minority, and whatever that happens to be, and then you could break that down. And otherwise there's evidence of systemic prejudice. Okay, now, first thing to say about that is that's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because there's no limit to the number of ways that you can categorize people into groups. So you know about sex and ethnicity and race, maybe those are the obvious ones, but now you have gender, and then you have ethnicity, and then there's attractiveness and intelligence and temperament and height and age and socioeconomic background. And I mean, let's say there's 20, but there's a lot more than that. There's no possible way that you could ever regulate a society so tightly that every single one of those groups was equally represented in every single one of those occupations at every single level of the hierarchy. That is impossible. So they want to concentrate
on the significant ones, so men and women and race.
Well, yeah, but who's to say those are the significant ones? That's the other thing. It isn't even obvious that they are, because I would say that like a more significant one is cognitive ability, because that's a way bigger predictor of long-term life success than sex or race. So I don't even think that we've necessarily identified the canonical groups. We've just decided that gender and race are maybe they're the most obvious.
Right, but isn't there a problem is that people don't, what they don't do is they don't take in terms of cognitive ability, they don't get on a team. They don't get on, like, there's people that are sexist.
Yeah.
But it's very rare that someone is elitist in terms of their cognitive ability.
Well, hard to say, Joe. I mean, I think one of the reasons that...
I shouldn't say elitist. Prejudiced is a better word.
I don't know. You could be right. But look, I think one of the reasons that, like, here's something that's kind of peculiar.
Actually, it doesn't even make sense now that I'm thinking about it. Of course they are.
There's one thing that's quite peculiar about the United States in that regard. Is like most working class people, let's say, are far more irritated with the intellectual elite than they are with the wealthy elite. And that's because they think they could become wealthy, and they could, but they don't think they could become part of the intellectual elite. And it isn't obvious to me that the intellectual elite, so those would be the liberal left-leaning types that dominate the media and academia, are particularly positive in their attitudes towards the typical working class person. I think they're prejudiced and elitist. I do believe that that's the case, and I think they're also what would you call it, patronizing. And I think that the typical working class person, say, who voted for Trump, is very, very sensitive to that. And so they're much more concerned with the 1% who are the cognitive elite than they are the 1% who are the economic elite, because at least they think that's a game they could play.